Hi guys, this is Paglione here. I'm just going to go through this radicals formative assessment with you. I will say that hopefully you've checked your answers with the answer key before you began this video, and then that way you can just kind of fast forward or push through the questions and just go to the ones that you're having some trouble with. But I am going to work through every single problem here on the worksheet. So for the first one, so you want to make sure that you have these radicals completely simplified before you go through the process of trying to add and subtract. So if I start with the first one, this has the square root of 25 in it times the square root of 3, which makes this radical 5 root 3x. Then the square root of 100 is 10, and then 10 times 3 gives you negative 30, but the root x has to stay inside. Square root of 25 is 5. So 7 times 5 is 35, and then the square root of x has to stay inside again. 192. So 192 breaks down into the square root of 64 and the square root of 3. So the square root of 64 gives you the negative 8, and then it becomes root 3x. Then if I go through and combine what I have as like radicals, I've got the positive 5 and the negative 8, which gives me my answer of negative 3 root 3x. And then here in the middle, we've got my root x's, so I can add those together. Negative 30 plus 35 gives me the positive 5 root x. And then it doesn't matter the order that you have there. You could have the positive 5 root x and then minus 3 root 3x. That would be fine as well. Moving on to the next problem. So the first thing that I would do, honestly, guys, is I would go through and try and simplify as much as possible. So 2 and 12, they're both reduced by 2. So that gives me 6 there. And then the same thing here with the x to the 4th and the x to the 6th. That leaves me with the top, leaves me with the square root of 1, and the bottom becomes 6, and then simplifying x squared. And then this cancels and leaves me with an x on the outside with my root 6 left on the inside of the denominator. And then the square root of 1 is just 1. And then 3 times 1 is obviously just the 3 up there at the top. But now remember, you cannot have a radical in the denominator. So I have to multiply both sides by the square root of 6, so the top and the bottom. So this gives me 3 root 6 at the top. And then x root 36, well, the square root of 36 is 6. So 3 root 6 over 6x. And then once again, I can continue simplifying. So 3 and 6 are both divisible by 3. This becomes a 1, this becomes a 2. And I get my final answer of 1 root 6 over 2x. But like always, we usually don't end up writing that 1 that's there at the top. All right, looking at the next problem here, you're either going to be double distributing or you're going to be foiling. So I'm going to show double distributing because I know my class appreciated that a little bit more, but you can easily do first, outer, inner, last for foiling. So if I multiply my first negative 8 root 6 times everything in the second set of parentheses. So negative 8 root 6 times root 6 gives me negative 8 square root of 36. Negative 8 root 6 times root 2 gives me negative 8 root 12. And then I'm going to go through the same process here with the bottom. So I take that second term, which is the negative 7 root 2, multiply it by root 6, gives me negative 7 root 12. Negative 2 root 2 times root 2 gives me negative 7 root 4. Then I'm going to start simplifying. So to simplify, the square root of 36 is 6. So negative 8 times 6 gives me negative 48. Square root of 4 is 2. Negative 7 times 2 gives me negative 14. And those middle two terms there, they can be combined. So negative 8 minus 7 gives me a negative 15 root 12. Now, the terms on the ends, the constant terms, can be combined. So that gives me a negative 62. And then I'm going to bring down the negative 15 root 12. Most kids might stop at their answer here, but we have to remember that root 12 needs to be simplified a little bit further. The biggest perfect square that goes in there is the square root of 4. So the square root of 4 times the square root of 3 is 2 root 3 multiply that by the 15, so that's going to give me my final answer of negative 62 minus 30 root 3. Once again, you can write that flipped around, so if you want to write it as negative 30 root 3 minus 62, that's an okay answer as well. Moving down here to the bottom. So if I try to get rid of the radical in the denominator by just multiplying by the square root of 14, we kind of talked about this in class, you're just going to be moving the location. So what you have to do is you have to multiply by what we call the conjugate. So the conjugate is the same numbers, so that's still negative 1 and the square root of 14. It's just you have a plus sign now in between at the bottom. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to make sure that I do to the top. So the top is the distributive property. So I'm going to go through and use the distributive property. So the first one's going to be 2 root 7 minus 2 root 98. Now the bottom is when I have to go through either double distributing or foiling again. So if I go first, outer, inner, last, that's going to give me 1 minus the square root of 14 plus the square root of 14 minus the square root of 196. So the square root of 196 is 14, and the middle two terms cancel out because negative 1 plus 1 goes to 0. So my bottom, if I keep simplifying it, it's 1 minus 14, which gives me the denominator of negative 13. Top, go ahead and rewrite it. Now there is one other thing I have to do with the top. The square root of 98 is not simplified. So I can actually pull out a 49 and the square root of 2. So the square root of 49 is 7. So 7 times 2 gives me that 14, negative 14 up at the top, root 2. And then 2 root 7 gets to stay there, and the negative 13 stays at the bottom. 2, negative 14, and negative 13 don't have anything in common, so I can't simplify using kind of that heart method I had talked about before, so I can't do that. So I am done. Next problem. All right, this is just multiplication. So on our previous quiz, some people just tried to simplify and never ended up multiplying. So this is actually multiplication. So I am going to multiply first. So I'm going to do 7 times negative 1, which gives me negative 7. And then inside the square root, 13 times 26 gives me 338. And then I have 1 and 5, so 6 x's, 1 and 3, 4 y's, and 5 total z's. 338. So 338 is the square root of 169 and the square root of 2. So that ends up being 13 root 2. But I have to remember to multiply by the negative 7. So negative 7 times 13 gives me negative 91. And then inside my square root, I'm going to have a root 2. So I'm just going to leave some space there because I have to simplify all my x's. So for my x's, actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to leave it. I'm going to break the x's up into pairs of 2. So x to the 6th power means I have 3 pairs of 2. Y to the 4th power means I have 2 pairs of y. And z to the 5th means I have 2 pairs being squared and 1 z being left on its own. So when I start the simplifying process, this cancels, this cancels, this cancels. I have 3 x's on the outside. This cancels, 2 y's, and 2 of those cancel, which leaves the 2 and the z left over in my square root. Actually write my 2 like that. All right, next problem. So this one we have to square first. We cannot share the exponent, okay, because we have addition inside the parentheses. So I have to cross out my square and rewrite it and use FOIL or double distributing. So this problem does take a little bit more time. So starting with the FOIL. So I'm going to kind of leave this here on the outside, but I'm going to start with the FOIL. So with the FOIL, first, outer, inner, last, or double distributing, what I'm going to end up getting is 9 root 25 plus 18 root 5 plus 18 root 5 plus 36, because 6 times 6 is 36. So looking first at my square root, the square root of 25 is 5, so 9 times 5 gives me 45. Like terms in the middle, add those together gives me 36 root 5 plus 36. Then I have two constants here that I can add to give me 81, but this is still in parentheses. So what I have to do next is I have to take this -1 here, this negative sign, and distribute it into that binomial. So it's 7 root 5 minus 81 minus 36 root 5. So that's the common mistake that a lot of people will make. They'll forget about giving the minus also to that 36 root 5. And then when I combine like terms here, I've got like radicals, so 7 minus 36 gives me a -29 root 5, and then out front I'll leave the -81. But like before, you can change the order if you'd like. It looks a little messy, so I'm going to make it look a little bit nicer. All right, next one we're going to go through and use the Pythagorean theorem. So it looks like I've got A, I've got C, but I'm missing B. I don't know what B is. So as a reminder, the Pythagorean theorem is A squared plus B squared has to equal C squared. Well, my A squared is 4 root 2 squared. Don't know B squared, but I know that C squared is 12 root 5 squared. I'm hesitant to put this in your calculator. If you do put in your calculator, you have to make sure you put parentheses around it before you square it, because if not, your calculator is going to lie to you. Instead, I'm going to show how we can do it by hand. So 4 root 2 times 4 root 2. 4 times 4 is 16. Root 2 times root 2 is root 4, which is 2. 16 times 2 gives me 32. All right, so my A squared is 32 plus B squared equals, do the same thing over here with this radical. So this is 12 root 5 times 12 root 5. 12 times 12 gives me 144. Root 5 times root 5 is the square root of 25. Well, the square root of 25 is 5. 144 times 5 gives me 720. Then I'm going to subtract over the 32 and take the square root of both sides. So B squared is equal to 688. Take the square root of both sides, which allows the squared and the square root to cancel, leaves me with my answer of B. And I just need to break down 688. So that's 16 and 43. So it's going to be 4 square root of 43. As my answer. All right, next one I need to find out what the C is, which is the largest length or the longest side. And when I put 8 square root of 16 in my calculator, or 8 times the square root of 16, I end up getting about 32, almost kind of like 33-ish. So that's going to be my biggest side. So that's going to be my C, which means I can make my other one A and B. It doesn't really matter. Maybe I'll make 6A and B 10. So 6 squared plus 10 squared equals 8 root 17 squared. So 6 squared is 36, 10 squared is 100. That means my left side is 136. Right hand side, so this is 8 root 17 times 8 root 17. So when I multiply that out, that's going to be 64 and then the square root of 289. Square root of 289 is 17. 64 times 17 is not 136. Okay, I'm going to get 1088. So these are not equal to each other, so not a right triangle. Or however you want to write your answer. Okay, but definitely not making a right triangle.